This is Raul Lopez, and you're listening to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish? The path to success isn't easy. For minorities and people of color, many attempt this journey with little to no guidance. Join me as I sit down with individuals who share their stories of perseverance so that together we can learn how to say success in Spanglish. What's good, mi gente? And welcome back to How Do You Say Success in Spanglish. This is Raul. Today, my guest is Luis Lopez. How's it going, Luis?
Pretty good, man. How are you?
Really good, man. I appreciate you being here today. So Luis was born in San Luis Potosí, Mexico, and migrated to Beaumont, Texas with his family at the age of 7. The first in his family to graduate from high school, Luis continued his education at Lamar University, where he earned both his master's and bachelor's degrees in accounting. Currently an entrepreneur with an accounting firm, insurance agency, and residential construction company, which is a mouthful to say, man. That is a very impressive resume so far. So it's important, you came from Mexico, you migrated here at the age of 7, and now here you are owning 3 businesses. So you've done an incredible journey starting off. Tell me a little bit about your journey to the United States.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's, sometimes a little mind blowing when I think about it, because like many of us, I still don't feel like I've accomplished enough. I don't feel like I've done enough. But when I think back on where I started and where I come from, kind of gives me a little bit of perspective, right? But so I was, as you mentioned, born in San Luis Potosí, Mexico. I was born in the city, but I grew up in a small little country town with my grandparents. And I just, anytime I was in the city, I'd get sick. And that's just where we grew up. We grew up in the little small farm town and didn't have running water, didn't have electricity. We'd have to pack a donkey full of barrels and, hike down to where we could get potable water from and come back. But, my father had been coming to the United States since he was young, right? It was much easier back then. You could basically just walk over, come here, work, go back. It was a little easier. But it got to the point where he decided that he wanted to bring the entire family to the United States. And so he brought my oldest brother over first. At that point, there were 6 of us total. There's 8 of us now, but there were 6 of us then. I had 5 siblings at that point. I was the baby at that time. And so my father went to Mexico, brought my oldest brother, decided to go back maybe a couple months later, brought over my mother and the rest of my siblings. I stayed behind with my grandparents in the little rancho that I grew up on. So I stayed behind with them. And, a year later, by that time, they're living in Beaumont. So when my father brought everyone over, they were living in Huntsville, Texas. Then by the time they went for me, they were living in Beaumont, Texas. And I remember my grandparents, basically woke me up one day and said, "Hey, we've got to make this trip to the border. And your dad's coming for you, right? Your dad's coming for you." And I didn't really want to leave. I loved living in the country town, right? I didn't really realize that I was poor. It's something you really understand, right? Especially when everyone around you is living that way.
Mm-hmm.
To you, that's just normal life, right? And so I remember we went, met up at some little restaurant with a coyote, right? Basically someone that brings people over. And it's my father, a coyote, and my grandparents. And he starts shuffling through visas, finds one that looks like me and says, "Hey, this is your new name. This is your date of birth. Memorize this in case they ask you any questions," right? So I don't remember every single little detail. I mean, I was really young, but this is me from what I remember and what my parents had told me and piecing everything together. But so I say goodbye to my grandparents. My grandparents leave. Say goodbye to my father. He leaves. I'm here with this random guy. I jump in the car with him, and he crosses me over the border. Luckily, I didn't have to walk. Luckily, I didn't have to actually cross the actual river on foot, but asked me with this fake passport, fake visa. And all I had to do was smile. Like everything was okay. And I do remember wanting to take my toy gun, thinking if something goes wrong, I've got my gun, right? My grandfather always laughs at that story, at the fact that I thought, I was Zapata or something,
Yeah.
with this little fake toy gun. And needless to say, they didn't let me take it. I had to stay back home. And so we got past the border, past a few checkpoints, because once you get past the border, there are still checkpoints you have to get through. So we got past those checkpoints, met up with my father. I jump in the car with him, and we made the trip back to Beaumont, right? And same house that we grew up in, my mom still lives in, and small house, right? At this point, again, there's six of us, mom and dad. There's eight people in the house. A couple years later, my two younger sisters are born, and now there's 10 people in one house.
Yeah.
And my dad, he at that point he was working kind of like tree line, not tree line, utility line maintenance,
Yeah.
right? Power line maintenance. That's what he would do. And my mom, we having all the kids we had at home, my siblings, she didn't really work. She would work on and off when she could, right? Just depending on what the situation was like at home. And we didn't have any family in Beaumont. So it was literally just us, right? There was no one to help take care of my two younger sisters other than us, right? And my mom, and when the rest of us had to go to school, she couldn't really work. I mean, she had the two little girls at home. And so my dad actually, because, there were some financial struggles, went knocking door to door basically at some of these households that had massive acres in the Beaumont area that they were either growing some kind of crop or had some kind of work to see if they had any kind of work available for us, right? So it took me, my three older brothers. I'm the youngest of the four brothers, and I've got four. There's four men, four women in my family, my siblings, and came across the Griffins, and they owned the blueberry farm. Knocked on their door and asked them for work, right? And they told them, we'll hire the three older ones, but we can't take the little one. The little one was me. I go, no, you want the little one.
Yeah.
Little one's the hardest working one. you know,
So you came to the country, you're starting off new, you're dealing between starting a new language,
yeah.
starting what I presume to be a new education system, and your family's struggling financially and trying to get you to work at the same exact time, right? So how were you feeling at that moment?
I think I was at that point just going through the motions. I mean, I
Mhm.
was happy to be reunited with my brothers and sisters. And I moved. They brought me to the United States around in the winter time. I remember it being cold. It must have been November, December because I didn't start school until the spring semester. And they weren't able to enroll me until the spring semester. And I just remember being happy to be with my siblings, to be reunited with them at first. Once school started, I mean, it was difficult, right? Again, I didn't know English. Um, I didn't dress like the rest of the kids. I didn't understand the culture, right? I came from this little farm town. I'm still wearing my cowboy boots and, you know, jeans, and I'm living in a completely different environment, right? And it's difficult, man. It is difficult at first, and I was happiest when I was at home because I was there with my siblings, right? And we could speak Spanish, and uh, some of them could speak English by the time I was brought over because they'd been here for a year, right? And I remember at the beginning, sometimes I don't even know if they were speaking English, but I think they would do it just to get on my nerves and pretend like they were talking about me.
Yeah, it's always typical to go to mess with the little one, right? When they're
That's
coming.
right.
And so in school, how, you're undocumented. I think things probably a lot different back then compared to probably the way things are now, especially in Texas. Um, but how difficult was it for you guys to kind of get enrolled in school?
Yeah, I mean, I think my parents leaned a lot on my older siblings to figure it out for them,
Hmm.
right? At that point, I was the baby. I didn't know what was going on. They told me go left, I went left. They said go right, I went right. But my parents leaned a lot on my older siblings to kind of help them figure it out and piece it together. My oldest brother is in his 40s, so there's a pretty good gap, right? I mean, I'm 34, and so they kind of leaned on each other to figure it out and get everyone enrolled. And there must have been an administrator that spoke Spanish at the school
Yeah.
because if there wasn't, there's just no way they could have fully figured it out, right? What vaccines did I need? What registration documents that I need? Again, I was undocumented, so what did we have to give other than a Mexican, birth certificate,
Yeah.
right? That's literally all I had. So, and I had zero vaccinations, right, that are required here in the states, and so I mean, there had to have been someone that spoke Spanish in the administration building to help them figure it out. If not, I mean, it would have been impossible. But granted, the blessing in having six kids at the time is that you'd already done it five other times, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
by the time I came to the United States, it was a lot easier.
Yeah. 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 Hey, we already know the forms to fill out. Here you go.
Exactly. We already have a copy in Spanish.
At what age was it when you started going to you said the Griffins and their farm? Did you actually start working at that age when they first came around, or did it come
No, I
later
mean,
on?
yeah, it had to have been later on because again, so my birthday's in December, right? And then I started school in January, and then blueberry season isn't until the summer, right? So it had to have been that summer. So I was probably around 8, 9 years old, probably when I started working for them. And it was weekend work at that point, right? I mean, I was still in school. I had to be in school. I didn't have a choice but to be in school. And so all the work I did for them was on the weekends, during the summers, winter breaks, whenever I had the availability to be there.
Was there a balance in your household when it came to work and school, or was school focused more, or was work focused more?
I mean, at that age, being that young, coming from a country town, you worked every day. Work, right? I mean, when you're born in that type of country town, again, no electricity, no running water. The minute you can walk, you're a little man, right? They treat you like a little man, right? I mean, yes, you're still a kid, but you're still getting up. You're attending to the animals. You're attending to the crops. You're doing whatever you can to help, right? So for me, going to work and especially being outside at a blueberry farm, that didn't feel any different than what I was kind of already used to. So for me, that part wasn't a culture shock. The culture shock or the difficult part was dealing with school, right? Um, yeah, that was the hard part for me.
What helped you start focusing on the idea of higher education? Like what kind of changed your perspective?
Yeah, so it was actually, and it wasn't that I didn't have that I never wanted to focus on school, right? Because even when I think back, in elementary school, I did well. Once I learned English, I did well. I mean, by the time I was before I went to third grade, they put me in what they called honor classes or advanced classes, right? And so they moved me over. So I, I could tell that I was a little smarter, I guess, from that sense, the fact that they even moved me there. But I didn't understand anything further than that, right? None of my siblings at that point, if I remember correctly, were old enough to have graduated yet when I was in elementary school. But, you know, what introduced me to the idea of higher education or who introduced me was actually Mr. Griffin, just working with him, right? Whenever he wasn't at work and he was available to be out there in the field with me, because he would get out there, get out there and work with us. And, on days that it was blazing hot, freezing cold, or raining on us, and we were still out there working, he would ask me, he'd say, Luis, do you want to do this for the rest of your life? And I'd say, no, sir. And then he would ask me, Luis, are you going to college? And I would say, yes, sir. I had no clue what college was. I had no clue what it meant. I didn't even know how to spell it. But he put it in my mind early on that if I didn't want to live in that situation and work outside in the fields for the rest of my life, I had to go to college, right? So early on, he introduced me to the idea of higher education. He just introduced me to that idea. And one of my older brothers that actually at one point ended up getting deported, he was the one that kind of cracked the whip on us when it came to education.
Mhm.
He's the one that would, when we came home, hey, eat and get to work, right? Pull your books out, do your homework if you have homework. Because back in those days, we had homework. My daughter, I have a 10-year-old. My daughter doesn't have homework anymore. It's not
Yeah,
even a thing.
they don't do homework.
Yeah, yeah. And so, but he's the one that would push it. And I mean, all of us, right? He would get on top of all of us, all the younger ones, anyone that was younger than him. He was honest. Hey, eat, go ahead and eat, sit down, eat whatever there is on the table, and then do your homework, right? Do your homework, then you can go play. If you haven't done your homework, you don't go play, right? So my mom didn't get on to us about homework. My dad didn't get on to us about homework. He's the one that would stay on top of us and make sure that we were focused on our education.
And you said he ended up getting deported.
He did.
And how were you able to handle, especially when it came to stuff like homework and stuff after that fact?
Man, it was difficult, and it was very difficult because for me at that point, my older brother was like my role model.
And
You know,
not to cut you off, at what age was this?
I mean, he was 16, so I had to have been, let's see, I had to have been maybe 11 around there.
Okay.
So he was 16, he was 16, 17. He was 17, I believe. So it wasn't too much longer right after I got here. And so yeah, it was difficult because he's the one that again would stay on top of us. I started boxing because of him, right? He would go to the boxing gym. I started boxing with him, and I looked up to him in sports. I looked up to me even at work, even at the blueberry farm. They would the way you would pick blueberries is you'd have this strap, right? And you have a bucket hanging onto you in front of you, and you're just, picking blueberries to fill orders, right? And he was fast. I mean, he was the fastest person there, right? And I was committed every single day to trying to outbeat him and outperform him, right? So when it came to education, work, sports, like that was my metric. I wanted to beat him. I wanted to be better than him. And so, when he ended up getting deported, and simply because we were working, right? I mean, he went to cash a check and had an issue with the check, the name on the check. I think he gave them the wrong ID. The ID didn't match with the name on the check. And so the bank ends up calling the police thinking that he's trying to commit check fraud. And the police, they arrest him, and then they realize he's undocumented. So then now he's put into immigration holding and, ended up getting deported. And so for me, that's when I first realized that I didn't belong, because before that, I didn't really understand that I was undocumented. I didn't really understand. I understood that, again, I was in a different country. I understood that I didn't know the language, but I didn't understand that I wasn't supposed to be there.
Yep.
Right. I didn't understand that I could be taken away from my family. I didn't understand that my entire family could be sent back, with the exception of my father, because he was a permanent resident at the time. Right. So that's when I really realized that we didn't belong in the country. Right. And I remember even that if I was ever sick and I stayed home from school and I went outside and I saw a cop drive by or a helicopter, I would run inside, because my thought process is, if someone sees a kid out in the yard and it's school day, they might call the cops saying, "Hey, this family's not taking his kid to school." And the cops come, then we're all getting deported,
Yep.
right? I kind of had that fear a little bit when I was, still younger. As I got older, I didn't care.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I kind of started to feel ownership of this is my country too, and I belong here. But at that time, when that happened, and I felt, again, I realized I just wasn't legally supposed to be here. And that was a shock as well.
Yeah, and I think it's a very common idea, mentality. Sorry, when it comes with undocumented. Like when I was undocumented too, you kept your head down and you stayed quiet because you didn't want to stir up anything that would cause you to um, get kicked out of the country. I remember just, and not just me, with other family members that came to this country, like just a simple thing like complaining to the landlord that the heater is not working or something's broken. You were afraid. You were afraid that you'd go there and stir up the wrong type of situation. And a lot of people do end up taking advantage of that as you work through it. You know what I mean? But it seems real nice to be able to have that you guys worked at a blueberry farm, but you had someone who obviously cared about you enough to encourage you to do better. Can you tell me a little bit about your relationship with the Griffins?
Absolutely, absolutely, man. Yeah, I mean, they were, you know, I know that for them, it was also difficult when my brother was deported, because they really loved him and cared for him a lot, and they knew that he had a future, right? If my brother wouldn't have been deported, I mean, he would have either gone to college, gone to the military, or maybe even been a pro athlete. I don't know, right? I mean, he was a good boxer whenever we did box, right? So he had a lot of potential, right? And with the opportunity, you mix in his work ethic with the opportunity this country gives you, he would have been great at whatever he chose to pursue. So it was difficult for them. It was very difficult for them as well. And they would check up on me, right, and just talk to me just to make sure that I was okay after this happened. But they would they would bring also. So Miss Griffin was a teacher at one of the local high schools, and they would bring some of these big guys, these athletes, right, to come work for the summer. And I would they wouldn't last with me. They wouldn't last with me. Mr. Griffin would always laugh about, and he'd see this big football player coming up and ready to work, and he shows up day one, and then I pull up and I'm this scrawny little Mexican kid, and the big guys would kind of just look at me like, who is this shrimp,
Hmm.
Mr. Griffin would always kind of just look at me and smile, and sometimes he'd walk me and say, "Hey, don't be too hard on them." And we get out there, and they just wouldn't last. There were a few guys later on as I got older, that would actually get out there and pick blueberries and do some of the work, but for the most part, man, they wouldn't make it. And Mr. Griffin would, again, he would get out there and work with me. Whenever he wasn't working, get out there and just he taught me so many things that I didn't realize he was teaching me just by everyday work schedule, right? Teaching me to be on time, teaching me to be early, teaching me, if I make a commitment, I have to follow through. He'd check on me, make sure my grades were good, and he just taught me so much, man, that I didn't realize it at that time. He also taught me to go with my gut, follow my gut, because a little funny side story. One day I get there early and he says, okay, there's 2 rows of blueberries that we need to prune, right? We need to prune all of these. And he tells me the height where we need to prune them and everything. And for some reason, I put it in my mind that that wasn't right. And I needed to go prune them lower, right? So I did. After he left, after he had left, I did what I thought I should do. And I pruned them. And then when he came back, at the end of the day and saw what I did, oh, he was livid. He was so mad because he thought those 2 rows of blueberries were going to die and weren't going to make it past the winter, because I pruned them too low. And so about a season or two later, man, those 2 rows were the best. I mean, I thought they produced the best blueberries, the juiciest. I mean, those little experiences just taught me a lot, right? I mean, I was young, I was working. He gave me direction. I said, I don't think that's right. I just followed my gut and went with it. And so those little things just taught me so much, and it gave me the confidence to just continue to do the things that I wanted to do, and just believe in my mindset. You know. So yeah, but I'm forever grateful for them, and I still have a great relationship with them to this day. You
Nice.
know, I
Awesome.
have a great relationship with them.
That's awesome, man. And it's good to have, a positive, positive person in your life that helps guide you and helps you whatever out, even outside of family members sometimes, especially in a situation where you've lost your brother who was kind of probably that same type of support that you had at that time. And they were able to kind of help as well to pick up those pieces. But what point did you start realizing, I think college, you were told college and you didn't know how to spell it. And now maybe you hopefully learned how to spell college by the time you got to high school and you're starting to kind of understand that process anymore. How was that journey from high school to getting ready to go to college?
I think the first time I realized that it was possible was my freshman year of high school, and it was the second semester of freshman year of high school. We come back from winter break, right? And all of the students, some of my friends, because I was still in honors classes and advanced classes, and some of my friends started talking about class rank and GPA, and I had no clue what that was. I didn't know what a GPA was. I didn't know what a class rank was, and so I just kept hearing them talking about it. Oh, I'm this rank. This is my GPA. And finally, I said, hey, I asked one of them, what is that, and how do you get it? What does it mean? And one of them explained it to me, and I went to what would be considered like the hood school in Beaumont,
Yeah.
right? And so they tell me, oh, it's basically where you rank academically, how your rank is based upon your GPA. And I said, well, how do you get that? You have to go to the counselor's office and ask them for it. Okay, so I first chance I got, I ran down there and went to the counselor's office, asked them for my GPA, and I think I was number 8 or number 10 in my class, right? And that kind of blew my mind, right? That I was number 8 or number 10 in my class. And at that point, we started out in our high school class with a huge class. But unfortunately, the school that I went to and some of the influences we had, we ended up with a smaller graduating class. But that was the first time that it kind of clicked in my mind that, okay, I think I've got something here, right? This whole concept I think is doable for me. I've got the ability to get there. And so that was my first kind of little spark that told me, okay, I think we can do something with this, right? I just need to stay focused and make sure that I stay in this range. And I think that gives me better opportunity. I didn't understand the full process yet. That was just again the first spark of I think I do have a future, right? Um, that was kind of the first little spark for me.
For a lot of us, there isn't resources. There isn't that much resources that can help us. Our guidance counselors, as much as they tried, they might focus on a few of the handful of kids and say, I'm going to put all my focus on helping you get there. And a lot of the rest of us kind of fall off to the wayside sometimes. For you, going through this, what helped you guide you into that process?
So I was lucky enough to be placed in an SAT prep class, and so And that's where I met Miss Hooper. So Miss Claire Hooper was a massive influence, and she helped me through that entire process. So I get tossed into this class, and again, this school is predominantly African American. The second, majority is Latinos or Mexicans, because in Beaumont we don't have a diverse Latino community. In Beaumont, it's basically just Mexicans, and so that was the population, right? And Miss Hooper is about as white of a lady as white gets, in a very, very, more rough type situation. But first day in the class, she kind of blows everybody away with just her personality, who she is, her approach to teaching, right? She would put up these bonus words that were kind of an educated way to uh, say something negative to someone, or talk trash to someone, right? And there were these bigger, sophisticated words, and that to us was hilarious, right? And I developed a great relationship with her as well over time. And my school and my counselor was terrible. I mean, she would not help us, right? Unfortunately, my school, again, being in the situation that it was at, with the majority being African American, even our administration was mainly African American. And it really felt like a lot of their attention went to the African American students, and the Latinos were just pushed aside, basically, right? And so I'd be banging on the counselor's door, asking for access to scholarship applications, asking for guidance on colleges, and she wouldn't really help me much, right? Even though I was ranked at the top of my class. And so I would go to Miss Hooper, and Miss Hooper would help me, and she would help me find scholarships. She would help me if I wrote an essay, I'd give it to her. She'd critique it, make some grammar adjustments, tell me what to change, kind of help guide me through that process. Even when I was getting ready to apply for college, she helped me with that process as well, right? And again, she was my SAT prep teacher. So she understood that process from start to finish. And so, one time I remember being in her class, running in her class, and showed her this application for a scholarship, and it said not to include anything else other than the essay, right? So what I used to do is I would include newspaper clips that I've been and for the work that I was doing in the community. I would just attach them in there, right? And this one said specifically not to do it, right? Only send in your application and your essay. Don't mail anything in, because also back in the day, a lot of it was mailed, right? Like now everything is an email. Everything's an email or online application, right? A lot of these applications were mailed, and I had to mail it in. And so, which makes us sound really old, right? Even though we're not, because we've advanced so quickly. But
One of my applications essays had to be handwritten. I had to write the whole thing handwritten. So yeah, it's
exactly, exactly. And so I told her, well, here's my essay, here's this, and I said, it tells me not to attach anything. And she said, well, you should go ahead and do it. What are they qualifying me? She said, I don't think they're going to qualify you. She said, well, once they see it, they can't unsee it, right? Once they see these news articles that you've been in, they can't unsee it. So you might as well attach it. And so I attached it, and I ended up getting that scholarship.
nice.
So she's the one that helped me and guided me throughout the entire process, and even after college, I mean, she's been a huge, you know, influence. Unfortunately, she passed a few years ago, but uh, everything I did since the day I met her, she was always there, always very supportive, always someone I could call, bounce ideas off of, and she kept me in a straight line. She kept me in a straight line.
And um, you know, we kind of go back to your pruning story where you took a risk and you didn't know if you would take that risk. And once again, you were in a situation where you took a risk. You wanted to take the risk, but you didn't know if you should take a risk. And fortunately, you had someone around to kind of nudge you. And slowly, you're getting more and more. I think risk. I don't even know what the word is. You're more open to being and taking risk, and it's nice to see a little progression moving on for you. And I'm guessing you're starting to apply to colleges. How does your family feel about you at this about your journey?
Right, absolutely. So my sister that's above me, age wise, she's 2 years older than me,
Mhm.
right? So we went to high school together for a short period of time, but she ended up not graduating and went to work. And then above her, or the next one to her, is my older brother that's 4 years older than me, right? And he hadn't, graduated. He chose to work as well instead of pursuing education. But, but we were close enough in age, right? Once I got to high school where we had better communication. But at some point, I was so involved in sports and then extracurricular activities, other things academically, and then just involved in the community, that sometimes they didn't know where I was, right? And so my older siblings got together, put some money together, and bought me a cell phone so that they could track me, so that they could actually track me and figure out where I was, right?
Mhm.
They didn't really understand. Well, I shouldn't say they don't, 'cause I've never asked them, right? So I don't know if they understood kind of why I was doing what I was doing, right? But to me in my mind, my goal was one, I've always been very passionate. If there's something I thoroughly believe in, I'm going to get up and I'm going to fight, right? No matter how difficult it seems to accomplish. That's just if I see something that I think isn't just, then I'm going to speak up, right? And so a lot of the things I was doing in the community were related to that, right? And a lot of the hooping and hollering I was doing at the school board meetings were related to that. And so, they got together and bought me this phone so they could track me and make sure that it wasn't in jail somewhere because I was protesting or something, right? And so my siblings were supportive. My siblings were very supportive of things that I was doing, right? They didn't know the process either of scholarships. They didn't know the process of applying for college. They were supporting me the way that they could. And I remember, one of my older brothers, my brother Ray, I got nominated to participate in this leadership forum or leadership conference over the summer, right? One summer, I remember it was my junior year. No, it had to have been it was the year, the summer before my senior year, the summer before my senior year. And I didn't have a suit. I didn't own a single suit. I owned some slacks and a weird colored long sleeve shirt, right? That I probably should be taking to this conference. And I had to wear a suit like just about every single day. I had to wear a suit. This conference was in Washington D.C. and I'm worried about I don't know what to do. I didn't really, couldn't figure it out. So my brother takes me to the mall and buys me like four suits, and out of his pocket, right? Buys me four suits, and thinking back now, I probably looked a little crazy because they were a little bigger on me. I didn't understand. None of us knew how to fit a suit or that we should be fitted or how it should look. But hey, I had four suits to take with me to this conference, right, in Washington D.C. And so, my siblings were always very supportive in the way that they could and in the way that they understood how to be supportive, right? My parents didn't really understand what I was doing or didn't understand if I was or wasn't applying for scholarships. They didn't, my dad and I never really had a conversation about college. He never said you should go to college. He never said you shouldn't go to college. He kind of just let me do what I was doing, you know? And, but he gave me work ethic, right? He gave me work ethic. He taught me he taught all of us work ethic, right? And without that, man, definitely wouldn't be where I am. So the education piece was really more up to me. It was up to me deciding that this is what I wanted to do and this is where I wanted to go. And my siblings would support in the way that they could. And mom and dad, again, just kind of get out of the way.
So we're getting to the end of college. I mean, sorry, the end of high school, and you're about to go to college, and you decided to go to Lamar University. And while at Lamar, you ended up getting your bachelor's and your master's. How was your time in Lamar?
Lamar was great. I loved it. I loved the environment. I loved the fact that it was small enough to have an intimate setting and large enough to give you the college experience, right? So one of the primary reasons I decided to go to Lamar was because I was already working for a construction company there in Beaumont, and I had already made the decision that once I graduated high school, I was going to move out and live on my own, and so I didn't want to be in a situation where I'm living at UT or going to UT and I have a $10, $9 an hour job, right? Whatever minimum wage was at that time. I think it was more like 7.75,
Yeah.
right? So I didn't want to be in that position and then being forced to pay for dorms, right? Like to live in a dorm. And I'd gotten scholarship, money and awarded scholarships. And so I knew what kind of budget I had to work with. I knew I was going to be on my own. And so I figured, hey, I'll stay in Beaumont, go to Lamar University. And my goal at that time was to go to law school. So for me, my bachelor's was just a stepping stone to, getting into law school in the future. And so I figured I'll stay here, keep my construction job, work, go to school full time, work full time. The world is perfect, right?
Hmm.
So that was kind of
And
my
how,
thought
how did that
process.
work out for you? So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, it was tough, man. It was difficult. My first semester was another culture shock. right? Not because of having to be responsible for yourself. I felt like I've been responsible for myself since I was a kid, right? Being forced to work at a young age and just growing up in the environment that I grew up in, I was always very independent, very self sufficient. But, you know, I'm going into college with the mindset of I graduated in the top of my class, right? I had a really good GPA, right? But the competition that I was competing against in my high school was not the best competition out there,
Yeah.
right? So once I got to Lamar University, and again, I'm in the honors program, right? I'm in this honors program and I'm struggling, right? I'm working 40, 50, 60 hours a week, just depending on how many shifts I'm trying to pick up, right, at work. And I'm going to school full time. And I, I started out my first semester failing every single class. I mean, I remember getting progress reports, right, from all of my teachers or all my professors, and I started out failing every class. And I had a like reality hit me like a train, right? And I realized, okay, how do I fix this? And it wasn't because I was out partying. It wasn't because I was out, living the college life, right? I really was never going out because I was working so much and work construction in the refineries in Beaumont, Port Arthur area. You have to wake up at 4 in the morning, be at the gate by 5:45, be ready to go to work by 6, right? So I wasn't out there partying. I wasn't living the college life. I was just struggling academically. I wasn't prepared, right? I wasn't as prepared for college as I thought I was, and that was a huge shock for me. So I did what I always do. I buckled down and uh, worked harder. Right? If I was studying 3 hours previously to getting those progress reports, I was studying 6 hours. Right? If I had to sleep less, then I was sleeping less. Right? So I remember my best friend and I had this class together, this English class, and this professor would make us write uh, essays every day. Just about every day, we had an essay we had to write. We had some we had to write every single day. And again, I'm working construction. I'm exhausted, right? And I'm still involved in the community. I'm still, going to school full time. And uh, my best friend and I were living together, and we would stay up, and write these papers that we had to write. And I remember one day I was so exhausted, my body gave out. Like there was no keeping. I just passed out, dude. And he tried to wake me up and push me and nudge me to wake me up. I wasn't waking up. So he decides that he's going to finish my paper for me, which I will thank him forever for doing this. I hope we don't lose our degrees for this.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna get a letter in the mail on Monday.
Exactly. Exactly. He finishes my paper for me, and a week later, or how many ever days later, we get our grades back, and I have a better grade than he had. even though he finished the rest of that one paper, but I always, we
but
always
but you
laugh
but
about
you
that.
picked the better topic. That's the that's
That's
the,
right. That's right. That's right. That's right. But yeah, I mean, the process was, it was difficult for that reason. I just wasn't prepared, and I had to put in more time. Right. I had to put in more time. I had to work harder at studying better. I had to create better study habits. Because high school for me was easy, because again, I wasn't academically challenged like I should have been.
Mhm.
Right, to prepare for college, and you know, no knock on Lamar University, but it's not Harvard, right? So I'm thinking to myself, why am I struggling this much, right? So needless to say, I put in the work, I put in the hours, I got it done. I ended up first semester with a 4.0, you know. So I did what I had to do to come out on top, and but it woke me up. It shook me up. That first semester shook me up, and I realized if I don't change something or work harder, then I'm losing everything that I've worked for to this point, up to this point.
And were you able to keep that balance between working full time and going to school full time, or did you have to cut down on work or and eat more ramen noodles and stuff like that to make things work?
That I'm a workaholic. I think I'm just built this way.
Hmm.
I was lucky enough though to, because when I first started working for that construction company, I was working outside, right? I'm on the shovel, I'm digging holes, I'm pouring concrete, I'm getting up at 3, 2 in the morning, when we have to pour these big tank rings so we can get there and beat the sun, right? And so I'm doing all this heavy work at the beginning, right? And I was lucky enough to where I was moved to a different project, and it was a huge expansion project for Motiva for the refinery. And the contractor I was working for, Mason Construction, had won a portion of that project, right? And so they offered me a position working in the office, and I ended up being, working in the office and helping with payroll or this analysis, that analysis, whatever they needed help with, right? So I put in a lot of time outside, but I got lucky to at one point they decided to move me into the office. And since they, knew I was going to college, they figured, hey, well, let's use this kid's brain to some extent.
Yeah, yeah.
Or just having him outside all day. And that helped, right? That helped because it wasn't as taxing, right? I wasn't outside pouring concrete all day. I wasn't outside in the sun all day. Granted that when you're younger, you have that energy. You can do that all day and come home and study because I did it, for some time. But that helped me as well, right? That helped me as well. That gave me the opportunity to again just be able to have a little more peace, right? And not be as exhausted all the time because there were times where I would show up to class in a Nomex, which is this orange jumpsuit. There's different colors, but I just had one orange Nomex, and I'd walk on campus thinking, man, are people going to think I broke out of jail? Walking on, I've got boots, dirty boots. I've got this Nomex on, and I'm walking to class, and I'd fall asleep in class sometimes
Yeah.
because I was just that exhausted, right? I was that exhausted that I would fall asleep in class, and friends would be nudging me, trying to wake me up and keep me up, and I'd have to ask them later, let me borrow your notes, and let me take these notes. And thinking back on it now, I feel like I would have retained a lot more of that information if I wouldn't have had to work the way that I worked, right? Granted, like you mentioned, I guess I could have. I mean, I always ate ramen noodles and I always ate tuna,
Yeah,
right? Because I'm just,
'cause it's
I don't know,
delicious.
it's delicious. Also because I can't cook, but
Yeah, uh,
we would have to go
yeah, yeah.
there.
And
But
so you're obviously things pick up for you. You graduate Lamar, you go get your master's, and then you're poof back out on what most people would consider starting the real world, but it looks like you've been starting in the real world since like the age of 8. So you're out there and you're starting to work and you're working in the corporate world. You know, how was that for you?
another culture shock, right? I feel like my entire life is just shocked from stage to stage to stage, right? Because I was blessed enough to earn an opportunity to work for Deloitte Touche, one of the largest accounting firms in the world, right? And I'm doing audit for them. So, I have my bachelor's in accounting, I have a master's in accounting, and I moved to Houston, big city. I've never lived in a city this big, right? And I'm working for Deloitte, and I get put on one of the largest audit engagements that the company has in Houston, right? Auditing enterprise products. And I'm on this team with, which is filled with tons of A&M graduates, right? It was me, a guy that went to Baylor. I think one of the girls went to Texas Tech, and then everyone else went to A&M, right? And it was very different, I felt out of place, and it was probably just me, right? They were all great people, easy people to work with, easy people to get along with. I think I felt out of place. I felt like I didn't, that some of that's what is it called, imposter syndrome,
Yeah.
right? I felt that, and I remember thinking by this point I know how to dress, I know how to present myself, right? But now thinking back on some of the outfits I elected to wear my first couple of months at Deloitte, I was like, that shirt, I probably shouldn't have wore that red button-up shirt to work, But it was difficult for that reason. I just kind of felt a little bit out of place. I mean, here's this snot-nosed kid from the rancho that was undocumented just a few years ago, and now I'm working for this massive corporation, right? And but I figured it out, like anything else, put my head down, got to work, put in the time. I felt like I didn't understand something. I just invested more time in learning it. Did whatever I could to figure it out. So,
And eventually you decide to leave corporate, right? And what made you decide to do that?
man, I just, I knew that I didn't want to work for someone else for the rest of my life. I always knew that, right? I mentioned earlier that originally I wanted to go to law school. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to be an immigration attorney, right? Because I wanted to help families that were in my situation with my brother being deported. I wanted to help prevent families being separated. And even then, I figured I'd have my own practice. I'd work for myself, right? One thing led to another. I ended up not going to law school and decided not to do that. But, you know, at the point where I decided to work for myself, I had my daughter. My daughter was born in 2013. My daughter was already born, and her mom and I ended up splitting up. And I'm balancing being a single father with this little tiny baby and working a corporate job, right? And right before I decided to go on my own, I'm working for a private equity firm, and the hours you work there as well are pretty intense, right? And I'm having a hard time just managing, getting home or rushing to the daycare, picking up my daughter, getting home, giving her a bath, feeding her, putting her to bed, and then going back to my laptop to work, right? Wake up in the morning, feed her breakfast, make sure I don't forget anything, rush to the daycare, drop her off, rush to fight traffic, get to work, and it's all over again, right? And I started to feel like I wasn't going to be a great father if I kept up that pace, right? I felt like if I continued in that direction, I just wasn't going to give my daughter the time that she deserved, because I've always had joint custody. We've always shared 50-50 custody. And so, I just didn't feel like it was fair to her, right? To put her in that experience. And, you know, I just decided, that I need to jump ship and I needed to work for myself, to own my time, to have that flexibility. So where I could accomplish both, right? Again, I always knew that I didn't want to work for someone for the rest of my life, but I also wanted to make sure that I wasn't, half-assing my job as a father.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we're here again. You're pruning a new tree, a new bush, right?
Right.
You're pruning a new bush in your life. You're ready to go jump off and start working, um, start becoming an entrepreneur and starting your own business. What's the first thing you did? Like, how did you like even start?
Yeah, I was searching for different business opportunities, a business I could acquire, a business I could get into. Myself and two other friends, we had started a business in college. We actually put some money together, bought some FedEx routes, and that was my first experience as a business owner, right? But in that situation, I had partners, so there were three of us, and we could lean on each other. We thought we knew everything and we understood business because we're accounting majors, but we honestly had no clue what we were doing. We were profitable. It turned out to be a profitable business. That business still exists, but you know that was my first initial experience. But by the time that fast forward and I have my daughter and I'm getting ready to make this jump, I'm on my own, right? And every search that I did, insurance would come up, right? And I'd never done sales, didn't have any experience in insurance, right? Didn't have any insurance licenses. And, I decided to reach out to one of my old mentors from my high school, college days, and she owned an insurance agency in the Beaumont area. Sat down with her. She gave me the good, the bad, the ugly, made an introduction for me to a district manager here in the Houston area. And I walked into the office open minded just to meet him, get an idea of what this looks like, what the operation is like. I walk in the door, there's an agency up for grabs that happens to be predominantly Spanish speaking clientele. I happen to speak Spanish, right? I figured, how hard can this be? I think I can figure this out. And so I signed the contract. I take over this agency. I've got, 60 days to get my license, find the location, build out the location, and hire staff, right? And here I go again, off to the races.
And starting a business, obviously, they say it takes money to make money. For a lot of us, we don't have money to make money. What are some things you had to do to come up with capital to start businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I've at that point I was lucky that I've always been good with money. I've always saved, right? I'm not the type to go buy the brand new sneakers or the brand new shirt or the brand new whatever fad is out there. I've always been great at saving money since I was a little kid, right? I always had more money than all my siblings growing up because I would save my money.
Mhm.
I'd let them go buy the video game. I talked them into buying the video
Yeah,
game,
yeah, yeah.
and I would save my money, right? And so I did have a good little nest egg. By the time I got to this point, I had a good amount of money saved up. Wasn't a lot, but it was enough to between what I had in the bank, between credit cards, right? I maxed out the credit cards that I did have. I spent just about every dollar that I did have, right? And then I also had two friends lend me some money, and one of my older brothers lent me some money. So I drafted up a contract. I wanted to make it as legitimate as possible, right? I didn't want to just, hey, buddy, lend me $10,000, right? So I drafted up a contract. Two of my friends lent me money. One of my brothers, between those three small loans that I received, um, between the money that I had saved up and the credit cards, I was able to, take over the business, secure the location, do the build out, and hire staff, and meet payroll. Because man, in the world of insurance, especially in the environment that the time that I jumped in, taking over an agency, they have to transition all the clients from that previous agent code to your agent code. And so I remember November 1st was the first month that I was supposed to receive a payment.
Hmm.
And my commissions that was paid on the first was $300. And my expenses were a hell of a lot more than $300.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? I remember going to Thanksgiving that year broke, broke. And I remember feeling a little guilty, not guilty, but kind of embarrassed, right? Because, you know, I was the sibling that went to college and my siblings supported me and kind of helped me in the way that they could. And I was supposed to be the one that was just doing well, right? And I'd gotten this great job fresh out of college or before even graduating college. I had a job offer from Deloitte, this prestigious firm. You know, and then here I am, fast forward a few years later, and I'm broke,
Yeah.
right? I'm completely broken, but they don't know it. I don't tell them. I'm pretending like everything is fine. I'm pretending to be myself. Again, I don't really care about how I dress, so they can't tell that I'm broke, right? They can't. And Christmas was the same. My daughter, I didn't get my daughter anything that year for Christmas, and when they asked, I just told them, hey, I don't want to spoil her. Because, they bought her gifts and, her mom's siblings would buy her gifts, but that holiday season was difficult for me, you know. But again, I maxed everything out, and luckily that first year was great. I mean, again, same concept, right? I put my head down. I went to work. I was in my office till 7, 8, 9, 10 o'clock at night, just making phone calls. I would stop making phone calls at 8 because I didn't want to bother people past. I figured if I called them past 8, they'd be mad at me, right? They wouldn't want to buy insurance from me. So, and I had to learn, right? I remember being nervous also picking up the phone. Like if a client calls me and they ask me a question, I'm going to look like an idiot. I won't know what to say. So I'd be nervous about just picking up the phone. I had to do it, so I would do it. And when they asked me a question I didn't know, I'm sitting here trying to look something up and search it quickly so I could figure it out and answer their question. But it was a challenge. Access to capital was difficult, but I made it work. I made it work. Had a really really great first year, and I paid everyone back within the first year. Paid back everyone that I owed money, and you know had a profitable year.
And so you start your business in insurance. Um, I'm guessing it's going well for you. It's doing a lot better than you're starting off with. Um, what made you decide to start looking into other businesses and expanding?
Yeah, so I took, I think, maybe the first year and a half, or the first 2 years, and focused fully on the insurance side. But at that point, I also decided, I didn't want to just let go of my accounting degree. I worked so hard to get my bachelor's and my master's in accounting. I didn't want to just let it go completely. So I started offering some tax services to clients, right? Tax prep, something basic, something simple, business owners, individuals, and doing those returns. And that demand grew over time. That demand grew, and they started, requesting or asking that I do their books, that I offer these additional services. And I would always tell them like, hey, it's just me doing this. I'm kind of just doing this for fun, right? Because I have insurance staff. I don't have an accounting team. And again, that demand grew, and I called up one of my buddies, one of the ones that I had originally started the first business with in college, because the three of us, again, we had degrees in accounting, and I knew he was already searching and searching for an accounting firm or accounting practice to buy. So I called him and I said, hey, I know you're out here and you're looking for an accounting practice to acquire. I'm in this position now where I'm losing money by not being able to offer these additional services. I said, are you open to the idea of us getting together, looking for a firm, acquiring a business together? He said, yeah, sure, let's do it. So we got together and, started looking for accounting practices and interviewed a few, then some we weren't too excited about, and for many other reasons. And we found the one that we decided to acquire in 2020, and did our due diligence, went through that process, and pulled the trigger. And bought my second business in the middle of a pandemic. It's during COVID,
Yeah.
obviously. So like you said, takes big risks.
Yeah, you keep on pruning that blueberry bush,
That's right.
and
All about growth.
yeah, and then living off that fruit of the labor. So it's been good,
That's right.
man. And so, as someone, people who don't know what they're getting into and how they get, like, what are some advice you'd give someone who's interested in trying to start their own business?
I mean, the biggest advice I would give them is there you will never find the perfect time, right? I meet a lot of individuals, that working for other companies, and they tell me, "Man, I've always wanted to start a business, or one day I'm going to start a business," and they're 40 or they're 50, and I'm thinking, if you haven't done it yet, the odds of you doing it are getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer, because now you start thinking about your retirement, right? And you start thinking about your kids going to college, right? And that expense. And it makes it more and more difficult to pull the trigger and leave that sense of security, right? So, and even when you're young, people that are young will tell, or younger, people will tell themselves, I'm too young, I'm too inexperienced, I don't know, I this, I that. They will make 1,000 excuses, right? So, there's never a perfect time to pull the trigger, right? You do need to take a calculated risk, right? You shouldn't just go out there and start some random business without putting in some thought and actually understanding the market or understanding what you're getting ready to get yourself into. But the best piece of advice I can give someone is if you feel like you're ready to do it, just do it, because there is no perfect time. There is no perfect time. It does not exist, right? Unless you're getting to something that's very, very niche, and timing is everything. But if you understand that, then you already understand what you're doing and why you're doing it,
Mhm.
right? But if you're going to go open up a coffee shop, there is no timing related to that, right? Right? You have to be willing, ready, and able,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
exactly.
that's the hardest part for people, is just taking that leap of faith. A lot of times, is the hardest, right? So if you found something you're passionate about, I mean, again, I jumped. My very first business was logistics. We owned the FedEx route. We knew nothing about it. We did it anyway. We were kids. We were in college. Yeah, the first business I did on my own was an insurance agency. I've never worked in sales, never worked in insurance. I didn't even understand my home insurance policy, right? I jumped into something that I didn't know, but I was confident in my ability to learn that industry. And, mathematically, I made it make sense, right? I made the numbers make sense. I was able to gather the money, put it together, pull the trigger, and then I put in the time, right? I think another big issue that we have currently just in society overall is like this whole self care. I agree, self care is important, but don't exaggerate it to the extent where you're not even willing to work hard, right? To the extent of, yeah, I'm going to go start this business, but I'm only going to still work 8 hours. That doesn't exist in the world of entrepreneurship, at least not at the beginning, not in the first 10 years. Working those 8-hour days, you'll have one here or there, but for the most part, they don't exist if you want to grow the way that you believe you're able to grow.
And so, your first year, and the first few months at least of your job, you were pretty broke, and it's fearful for a lot of people to start a new job, and I know for a lot of businesses, sometimes it takes a year or two before you even become profitable. What is something you kind of wish you had known early on that might have helped you get through things a little better?
I wish I would have understood the industry better, right? I wish I would have understood the industry better, because I wasn't aware that it would take anywhere between 30, 60, 90 days for this book of business to fully transfer to me. And that I would then start to see the renewal premiums or the renewal commissions come in, right? Because technically, if the system would have worked where day one, boom, everything transferred over, I wouldn't have had that cash flow issue those first 2 months, right? I would have had some cash flow issues, but not as big as they were, right? I wouldn't have had $300 being deposited into my bank account.
Yeah.
So, but that was my fault for not asking the right questions, all right? And I couldn't ask the right questions because I didn't fully understand what I was getting myself into, you know. And I didn't have, and honestly, I could have done a better job again of picking up the phone and calling that mentor I originally called and asking more questions. But my mindset is I dive in and I get busy with the busy work, right? And I just didn't anticipate that even being a problem, right? So, I mean, that was my mistake. Is not fully understanding the industry or exactly what I was getting into as well as I could have. But it all worked out.
Yeah, and I think sometimes we're all fearful of taking risks, and sometimes we'll dive headfirst and hope for the best. Sometimes you get prepared. Sometimes you're over prepared and never dive in because you get so scared in the minutia that you're like, oh, it's just so much stuff. Let's not do it. You know what I mean? And so we all end up kind of going in our own categories. Even even myself, like even within jobs, sometimes it's, oh, I'm comfortable here. I'm going to keep working this job, and then another job comes in at slightly higher level, slightly different, and you're afraid of jumping in that one because like I don't know if I'm going to do well in that job. And so for a lot of us, just the idea of jumping ship, whether it's even to a new starting a business or even just a new job, leaving your comfort zone can be real harmful. So it feels nice to be able to hear stories where you've taken some risks and can admit I messed up a few times here and there, and still, succeeded because it's about the hard work and pushing through it. So, man, I really appreciate you. Thanks for coming on the show. I think your story is amazing. Thank you very much for being here, Luis. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. No, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Dude, I commend you for doing what you're doing now because even this is difficult, right? This is a risk
Yeah,
because you are taking time out of your day, you're taking time out of your family, you're taking time out of your career um, to do this, right? And it's not easy. It's not easy to be in front of the microphone. It's not easy to be in front of the camera. It's not, I struggle with it,
yeah,
right? I don't doing it. I do not really like social media because I just don't like it. It's just not me. Even I can speak in a room full of 100 people and be okay. I don't like sitting here in front of a camera by myself and no one to talk to. It just feels so awkward, right? But I commend you for doing that, for taking that risk, and especially with the type of individuals that you're interviewing and the vision that you have for the podcast, because these are stories that again are just not told enough, right?
yep,
And they're not told enough. They really aren't, right? And you don't have to be this, the next or first Latino president to be on a show like this, right?
yep,
Or on a podcast like this to share your story because there are a lot of other young Latinos and Latinas that are going through the things that we went through that don't have anywhere to turn, right? They do have access to a podcast though,
yeah,
right?
hmm,
They might have a mentor in their life, but they have access to a podcast, right? So what you are doing is really going to help our youth that can find now it's our job to help you,
yeah,
right? Get your podcast out there and get it out there to the masses so they can listen to it. Because whether it's my story or someone else's story or your story, they're going to find some inspiration,
yeah.
right? So I commend you for that, man. And thank you so much for inviting me. It means a lot.
Yeah, man, I appreciate it, and that, definitely the case. And I, with this podcast, that's my goal. I hope at least one person gets touched by this each one of our episodes and helps them out somewhere. I'd love it in like 10 years if someone come by and say, hey, I wasn't gonna do this, but then I heard Luis cut that bush and I cut my own bush. So
That's right.
well, thank you very much, man. And to everyone else listening, thank you so much for your support. And I appreciate all the feedback I've been getting. And I hope you'll join us again next time as we continue to learn how to say success in Spanglish.